everyone, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I make videos primarily about strange disappearances and unexplained phenomenon, so if that interests you, feel free to subscribe or check out the rest of my videos. Today I'll be going through the first tier of the Missing Persons Iceberg. If you're unfamiliar with this concept, we'll begin at the tip of the iceberg, exploring a set of missing persons cases that have been widely reported on in the media and are well known to much of the public. In future videos, we'll work down the iceberg, with each tier featuring a set of stranger and more obscure stories of the missing. Out of all the icebergs made on the subject, I thought this one was my best choice, since it features many cases I've been wanting to speak about, and as far as I know, it hasn't been covered in full by another channel. I should mention here that there are a few stories I will not be covering in this first tier, such as those of Amelia Earhart and D.B. Cooper, simply because they have been so widely covered that I don't feel I have much to add. The same goes for the story of Madeleine McCann, along with the fact that to truly do her story justice, I would need to make an entirely separate video, which I'm open to doing in the future. But with all of that being said, I just wanted to give out a quick warning for this video, as it contains content some may find disturbing. If you're sensitive to this kind of subject matter, feel free to click off this video. And without further ado, let's begin. In the early hours of Sunday, September 5th, 1982, 12-year-old Johnny Gosch woke up and started getting ready to deliver the morning paper. Following in his older brother's footsteps, Johnny had become a paper boy about a year prior, and the whole time he had been assigned the same 28-paper route. But before that Sunday, he had never done the route completely alone. Having always been accompanied by his father or his mother, Johnny felt that he was finally ready to go out on his own, and had asked his father the night before if it would be okay to do so. Johnny's father, John Gosch, said that he could, but his mother Noreen protested, saying that it wasn't safe. So John told his son to wake him up in the morning and that he would go with him. Johnny agreed to do so, and the family went to sleep. The next morning, Noreen Gosch woke up to the sound of the telephone ringing at about 7 a.m. It was one of their neighbors, asking why Johnny hadn't delivered their paper yet. Confused, Noreen went downstairs and found that her son was not in his bedroom. With her husband still in the house, she realized that Johnny must have gone out on his own despite their agreement. Understandably worried, Noreen wanted to find Johnny as quickly as possible, but her husband told her to stay and make breakfast while he went out to find Johnny and see what was taking him so long. But before Noreen could even get her coffee started, Johnny's father burst back inside and told his wife to call the police. Not far from their home, John Gosch had found his son's wagon full of undelivered newspapers abandoned on the street corner. There was no sign of a struggle, but the Gosches feared the worst, since it was unlike Johnny to not take his job seriously. It would take 45 minutes for police to arrive on the scene, despite the Gosches living only 10 blocks away from the police station. In the time they spent waiting for the police, Noreen was able to find and speak to every paper boy but one that would have encountered or possibly seen Johnny at the paper drop that morning. This was the order of events pieced together by Noreen Gosch. After picking up his papers, Johnny was walking away from the paper drop about a block from his house when a man in a blue two-tone car pulled up beside him and some other paper boys and started asking for directions. Johnny thought that the man was strange and told another boy that he was creeped out and was going to go back home. But just as Johnny started to walk away, the man turned his car back on and flashed his overhead lights 3 times before driving away. By this time, most of the paper boys had dispersed from the drop, but there was still a 16-year-old boy there that then noticed a tall man emerge from between 2 houses and start following Johnny. Johnny ended up taking a left, going out of sight of the lone witness. This would be the last known sighting of Johnny Gosch. The 16-year-old then said that he heard a car door slam and saw the same two-tone blue car run a stop sign as it peeled out of the neighborhood. Despite relaying this information to West Des Moines police, Noreen said that the office seemed totally disinterested in helping find Johnny. At times they seemed determined to inhibit the search, at one point telling a group of 20 searchers at a state park to go home because Johnny was simply a runaway. When Noreen tried to get the FBI involved, West Des Moines police told her and the agency that they did not need any extra help. It was later discovered that they also declined help from the police of neighboring counties. And another thing, for the first 4 months in the search for Johnny, police refused to list him as anything other than a runaway in their system. Unsurprisingly, the police made little to no progress in their investigation. A strange encounter that we should note occurred the Friday before Johnny was kidnapped. That night, the Gosches attended a football game that their older son was playing in, and at some point, Johnny asked to get something from the concession stand. His parents allowed him to, since the stand was within sight of where they were sitting. But when Noreen looked down to check on her son, she saw that Johnny was gone. John Gosch then walked down to look for Johnny and found his son beneath the bleachers talking to a West Des Moines police officer. John called his son away from the man, and they went back up to watch the rest of the game. I couldn't find any information about their conversation, but from that point on, Johnny started to express interest in becoming a police officer. This odd encounter, coupled with police's incompetent investigative efforts, prompted many to believe that Johnny was not abducted by a lone predator. Noreen Gosch specifically believed that her son had been taken as part of an organized kidnapping ring, in which the West Des Moines Police Department may have been involved. In 1997, 15 years after her son's disappearance, Noreen Gosch said that in the middle of the night, her missing son Johnny, now 27 years old, visited her apartment, accompanied by an unidentified man. She said that the two stayed for about an hour and a half, and Johnny told his mother that back in 1982, he had been abducted by a ring of human traffickers, but had since escaped them and was in hiding. Noreen had been divorced from her husband when this took place, and he has said that he is not sure if such an encounter took place. While some believe this visit did not happen at all, others believe it may have been someone impersonating Johnny. But many, including Noreen, remain steadfast that Johnny Gosch is alive, but unable to come home. In the year 2000, Noreen self-published a book entitled Why Johnny Can't Come Home, detailing what she believes happened to her son, based off of her own investigation and her 1997 encounter. Noreen Gosch has ensured that the public does not forget about her son, and since 1982, she has worked tirelessly as an advocate for missing children and abduction awareness. Unfortunately for now, with no arrests made or suspects named in over 40 years, Johnny's case is still considered unsolved. "18-year-old Natalee Holloway went missing on May 30th, 2005, while on her senior trip to Aruba. The group of 124 high school seniors from Mountain Brook, Alabama, had arrived at the Caribbean island 4 days prior, and the trip had reportedly been full of late-night partying and heavy drinking. On the last night of the trip, Natalee met a 17-year-old Dutch national named Jorn van der Sloot at a popular bar called Carlos and Charlie's, and sometime in the early morning hours of May 30th, Natalee was seen leaving in a car with van der Sloot and 2 of his friends. This would be the last known sighting of Natalee. She would not return to her hotel that morning, and only hours later, she would not show up for her return flight to the U.S. Her parents were then contacted, and she was soon reported as a missing person. Initial searches conducted by dozens of volunteers and Dutch and Aruban authorities turned up no sign of Natalee. As he was the last person seen with the 18-year-old, Jorn van der Sloot quickly became a person of interest in her disappearance. In initial interviews, he said that after leaving the nightclub, he and his friends had taken Natalee to a lighthouse, but had dropped her back off at her hotel. He claimed that this was the last he saw of Natalee. However, this story would change several times over the course of the investigation, and he would be arrested and released repeatedly in the coming years. While van der Sloot was always the prime suspect in Natalee's disappearance, there never seemed to be enough evidence to convict him of any crime. However, in 2008, Dutch reporters aired hidden camera footage of van der Sloot seemingly confessing to involvement in Natalee's disappearance. The footage shows him explaining to a friend that after he left the bar with Natalee, he brought her to a beach, where she soon became unresponsive and could not be resuscitated. He said that he then called an unnamed friend whom he trusted, and this person agreed to hide Natalee's body at sea. When this footage was aired, van der Sloot recanted his statements, saying that he was simply telling his friend what he wanted to hear, and that it was all a lie. While this footage resulted in the reopening of Natalee's case by the Aruban prosecutor's office, Vandersloot was not rearrested because of it. On May 30th, 2010, exactly 5 years to the day after Natalee Holloway was reported missing, 21-year-old Stephanie Flores Ramirez was reported missing in Lima, Peru. 3 days later, she was found dead inside of a hotel room, rented by 22-year-old Jorn Vandersloot. Soon after this discovery, he was extradited to Peru, where he was sentenced and is currently serving a 28-year prison sentence for Stephanie's murder. In his confession, he stated that he had left Stephanie alone in his room to go pick up coffee, and that when he returned, he found her using his laptop without his permission, which prompted him to fatally attack Stephanie. Some sources indicate that she may have found information on the laptop concerning Vandersloot's involvement with the disappearance of Natalee Holloway, but I couldn't find any more information about this claim. Nearly 2 decades later, the disappearance of Natalee Holloway remains unsolved, but it is widely believed by investigators and Natalee's family that Jorn Vandersloot and his friends are responsible for her disappearance and/or her death. Nine-year-old Asha Degree vanished in the early morning hours of February 14, 2000, in Shelby, North Carolina. On the evening before her disappearance, Asha watched a basketball game with her parents and older brother and was sent to bed at about 8 p.m. According to Asha's brother, with whom she shared a room, everything had been normal that night. The last time Asha was seen by a family member was at about 2:30 a.m., when her father checked on them one last time before going to sleep. Shortly after this, Asha's brother recalled hearing his sister's bed squeak, but he just assumed that she was moving in her sleep. 4 hours later, at 6:30 a.m., Asha's mother went to check on her children and found that her daughter was not in her bed. Her parents frantically checked the rest of the house, but finding nothing, they checked the home of Asha's grandmother who lived down the street. But after being told that Asha had not been there, she was reported missing. Many worried that Asha had been kidnapped sometime that night, but there was no evidence of forced entry into the home. Before the first day's search for Asha was over, this theory would be entirely discounted. This is because Asha was spotted twice in the early morning hours of February 14th, walking alone on the side of Highway 18 which ran near her home. These sightings occurred between 3:45 and 4:15 a.m., and were reported by 2 motorists concerned to see a young girl walking alone on a rainy night, carrying only a small backpack. One of the witnesses circled back to check on the girl 3 times, but on the 3rd time, they saw her run into the woods off the side of the road. This would be the last known sighting of Asha Degree. The fact that Asha was seemingly a runaway made no sense to the Degrees. Asha's mother described her daughter as a cautious and shy child, whom she never thought would try and leave the house alone. Additionally, Asha did not fit the usual mold of a runaway child. First off, she was quite young to be doing so, and she didn't have the tumultuous home life often seen in cases of runaways. The only thing they could think of as to why she would run away was because she was upset that she had lost a basketball game days prior. Towards the end of that game, she had fouled out, and not long afterwards, her team lost for the first time all season. She reportedly cried along with the rest of her teammates, and said that she felt some responsibility for the loss. However, her parents said that she seemed to have consoled herself after a few hours. The day after her disappearance, searchers found candy wrappers, a hair bow, and writing utensils in a shed not far from where Asha was last seen. These items were later confirmed to be Asha's. Searchers would be called off after a week, and the next significant development would not happen for over a year. On August 3, 2001, Asha's backpack was found buried off of Highway 18 in a town 26 miles away from her home in Shelby, and in the opposite direction that she had been walking. The backpack had been wrapped in a plastic bag that did not belong to Asha. This was the last piece of evidence collected in the case, and it has effectively gone cold in the years since Asha's disappearance. Her reasons for leaving are still unclear, and investigators fear that Asha was a victim of foul play. In the early hours of June 3, 2011, 20-year-old Indiana University student Lauren Spierer went missing after a night out with friends. The following is a timeline of that night developed through both eyewitness accounts and surveillance footage. At about 12:30 a.m., Lauren left her apartment with a friend named David Rohn, and they walked to a party at the townhouse of their friend Jay Rosenbaum, whom Lauren had met at a summer camp years prior. At the townhouse, they met up with several other college students that lived in the same building, including two men named Corey Rosman and Mike Beth. About an hour later, Lauren left Jay's house with Corey, whom she had just met, and the two went to a local sports bar. They stayed for less than an hour before deciding to go back to Lauren's apartment, and it was here that Lauren left behind both her shoes and cell phone. By this time, she was heavily intoxicated, and her condition drew the attention and concern of several strangers who asked if she was okay. One encounter we should note was said to have occurred on the 5th floor of Lauren's building, while Corey, who was also very intoxicated, walked Lauren to her apartment. Around 2:30 a.m., a group of young men that didn't know Lauren confronted Corey in the hallway, as they didn't like the way that he was handling her. This encounter eventually turned into a physical altercation between Corey and one of the other men, and Corey claims that he was hit in the head, causing him to not remember much of the night. After this, Lauren and Corey ended up taking the elevator back downstairs, and at around 2:48 a.m., they set out once again for Corey's townhouse, but Lauren was seen continually falling, completely unable to catch herself. When searchers later retraced their steps, they found Lauren's keys and purse scattered on the ground. At times being carried by Corey, the two eventually made it back to his townhouse. The following is the testimony of Corey's roommate, Mike Beth. He said that he had been drinking that night and was awake when Lauren and Corey walked through the doors sometime after 3 a.m. He said that not long after they got back, he walked Corey to his bed and then tried to convince Lauren to stay the night for her own safety. He said that she did not want to, and so he decided to walk her next door to his neighbor Jay Rosenbaum's house, who, as previously mentioned, was a good friend of Lauren's. Jay also tried to convince Lauren to spend the night, but she was insistent that she wanted to go home. At around 4:30 a.m., Jay said that Lauren left his house and he watched her walk towards her apartment from his balcony. He said this was the last he saw of her. Later that morning, Lauren's boyfriend Jesse called her cell phone, which was answered by an employee of the previously mentioned sports bar. After failing to get a hold of Lauren through her friends, Jesse reported her missing. Lauren Spierer's disappearance quickly became national news, and a large search effort made up of Indiana police, the FBI, and many volunteers scoured the city, landfill, and several lakes in their search. At this time, police were receiving hundreds of tips, but none that led to any real breakthrough in the case. Early on, police said that they had 10 persons of interest in Lauren's disappearance, which included the men that she interacted with that night, as well as her boyfriend Jesse, who was not seen out on the town by any witnesses, and he says that he was at home watching TV when these events took place. Another person of interest was a man named James McClish, who had just been released from prison for assaulting his ex-wife, and was living about 10 minutes from where Lauren was last seen. He drove a white pickup that resembled a truck seen in the area at the approximate time of Lauren's disappearance, but I'm unsure if McClish was ever confirmed as the driver. A theory worth noting came from a student that attended IU at the same time as Lauren. His name is Corey Hammersley, and while he was once a popular student athlete, he allegedly fell into the university's drug scene, and about a year after Lauren went missing, he had a breakdown while on drugs and opened fire on police, earning him a 24-year sentence at Indiana State Prison. An inmate that knew Hammersley said that after seeing Lauren's face on the TV, he said that he knew what happened to her. Hammersley told the other inmate that Lauren had been at a house party with a group of unnamed students, and that she had overdosed while drinking and doing ecstasy, and in a panic, they disposed of her body in the Ohio River. Hammersley denies any involvement in this alleged cover-up, and has not named any names. As far as we know, this account has not led to any new discoveries in the case. About 12 years on, no one has been arrested or charged in Lauren Spierer's disappearance, and her family remains without answers, as authorities appear no closer to finding out what happened to the 20-year-old than they did in 2011. 6-year-old Timmothy Pitzen went missing on May 11, 2011. That morning, Timothy was dropped off at school by his father, but only about 15 minutes later, he was checked out of school by his mother, Amy Fry Pitzen. She had told the school that he needed to leave because of a family emergency, but this was soon discovered to be untrue. Instead, Amy drove her son to an auto repair shop, where she left her car until 3 p.m. While they were waiting for the car, Amy took Timothy to a nearby zoo, and after returning to the auto repair shop, they drove to the Key Lime Resort in Gurnee, Illinois, about an hour and a half from their home. When 3 p.m. rolled around, Timothy's father, James Pitzen, went to pick up his son from school, but was told that Timothy had already been picked up that morning by his mother. After not being able to get in contact with Amy, James reported his wife and son missing. While Amy and James Pitzen were still married and lived together at the time of her disappearance, the couple had been having marital issues in recent years. In 2008, they nearly divorced after it was discovered that Amy had been talking to and trying to meet up with one of her ex-husbands, but the couple eventually decided to stay together. However, they still had a fraught relationship, and on the morning of Amy and Timothy's disappearance, the couple had allegedly had an explosive fight. On May 12th, Amy drove Timothy to a resort in Wisconsin. The next morning, they were both seen on security footage checking out of their room. At 1:30 p.m., Amy made several calls to different family members to say that she and Timothy were safe and that there was nothing to worry about. Timothy was heard in the background of this call, saying that he was hungry. This would be the last time anyone heard from Timothy. Amy was next seen around 7:30 p.m., purchasing stationery at a dollar store in Winnebago, Illinois, this time without Timothy. She then went to a grocery store before checking into a hotel in Rockford, Illinois. The next day, her body would be found in her room, having taken her own life. There was no sign of Timothy at the scene. Amy had left behind notes to family and friends saying that Timothy was safe and was being taken care of. James Pitzen was shocked by both his wife's suicide and his son's disappearance, as he could think of no one that Amy would have trusted enough to place Timothy in the care of. Although Amy had well-known mental health issues at the time and had attempted to take her own life in the past, James did not think Amy would ever try and harm Timothy. When police searched Amy's vehicle, they found evidence that the car had been parked in a grassy field sometime before she checked into her hotel room in Rockford. However, police were unable to determine an exact location of where Amy had gone. They also found a concerning amount of Timothy's blood in the car, but someone close to the Pitzens said this was likely from a bad nosebleed Timothy had had earlier in the month. Despite extensive searches for Timothy, over 12 years have passed without any sign of him. While his father believes that Timothy is still alive, there has been little progress made in determining the whereabouts of the 6-year-old. Nine-year-old Michaela Garecht was abducted on November 19, 1988, in Hayward, California. That day, Michaela and her friend rode their scooters to the nearby Rainbow Market to pick up some sodas. But when the girls left the store and went back to grab their scooters, they found that Michaela's was gone. Instead of where they had left it, hers had been moved behind a nearby parked car. As Michaela went to pick it up, a man suddenly grabbed her and forced her into the car before driving away. Michaela's friend and a bystander witnessed her abduction, and both immediately ran into the store to call for help. The witnesses described the suspect as being between 18 and 24 years old, about 6 feet tall with a slender build, and having dirty blonde, shoulder-length hair. Despite this case receiving widespread coverage on both local and national news, and police receiving thousands upon thousands of tips, neither Michaela nor her abductor were found. On December 21, 2020, the FBI and Hayward Police announced that inmate David Mish had been arrested for the kidnapping and murder of Michaela Garecht. He was suspected of these crimes because police found that his handprints matched those found on Michaela's scooter. He has been in prison serving a life sentence for an unrelated murder since the year after Michaela's disappearance, and he is currently on trial for the murder of Michaela Garecht, as well as Michelle Xavier and Jennifer Duet, 2 women murdered in Fremont, California in 1986. As of 2023, There has still been no trace of Michaela Garecht found, but her family remains hopeful that they may soon have answers. On the evening of January 2nd, 2000, 18-year-old Zebb Quinn finished his shift at Walmart in Asheville, North Carolina, and met up with his coworker and friend Robert Owens in the parking lot. The two had plans that night to drive 20 minutes out of town to Leicester, North Carolina, to check out a car that Zebb was interested in buying. So after chatting for a minute, the two got in their separate cars, and Zebb started following Owens to the site. At about 9:15, the two stopped at a Citgo convenience store to pick up some sodas. They were caught on surveillance footage doing so, making this the last known location of Zebb Quinn. After this, we only have the account of Robert Owens to go off of. The following is what he said happened that night. After leaving the convenience store, and sometime before 9:30, Zebb flashed his headlights to get Owens' attention, and Zebb got out of his car and told Owens that he had received a page and needed to call someone back, not saying whom or why this matter was so urgent. He went to find a payphone and returned some 10 minutes later, visibly shaken. He apologized to Owens and said that he couldn't see the car that night, and that he had to leave right away. As he quickly tried to pull away, Zebb allegedly rear-ended Owens' truck by accident. Owens said this was the last he saw of Zebb Quinn. Only a few hours later, in the early morning hours of January 3rd, Owens would show up at a nearby hospital with injuries to his head and ribs that he said had occurred in a second, unrelated car accident. Yet those caring for Owens felt that his injuries were not consistent with those typically seen in car crashes. Additionally, he said that the accident happened near a Waffle House on Long Shoals Road, but there was no proof found that such an accident had even occurred. The next day, on January 4th, a man identifying himself as Zebb Quinn called Walmart and said that he was too sick to come into work. But the employee that answered the phone personally knew Zebb and believed that the voice on the other line was that of someone impersonating him. This call was later traced to a Volvo plant, the same place where Robert Owens worked. When he was later interviewed by police, he admitted that he was the one who made the call, but said that his friend had asked him to as a favor. One day later, on January 5th, Zebb's mother reported him missing to police. It appears that there were no further developments in Zebb's case until about 2 weeks later. On January 16th, Zebb's car was found in the parking lot of Little Pig's Barbecue in Asheville, North Carolina. This location was significant since the restaurant was only a short walk from the hospital where Zebb's mother, sister, and grandmother all worked. The vehicle's headlights had been left on, but this was far from the strangest detail of this discovery. On the rear windshield, someone had drawn a large pair of lips in lipstick, along with an exclamation point. Inside the car, the driver's seat had been adjusted for someone shorter than Zebb, and there was a jacket that did not belong to him. Additionally, a plastic hotel key and a live Labrador puppy were found inside. No one in Zebb's life knew what the symbols meant or where the Labrador had come from. I should note here that this puppy was later adopted by an investigator on Zebb's case. When investigators traced the page Zebb received on the night of his disappearance, they found that it had come from the home of his Aunt Ina. When police asked her why she had paged him, she insisted that she had not contacted her nephew that night. She said that she was not even home with her pager, but instead was at her friend Tamara Taylor's house having dinner, and it's here where things begin to get complicated. In attendance of this dinner was Tamara's niece, Misty Taylor, and her boyfriend, Wesley Smith. Misty Taylor was actually a friend of Zebb's, and while we don't know much about their relationship, we know that Zebb had been threatened by Misty's boyfriend in the past. When dinner ended that night, Zebb's aunt returned to her home and found that it had been broken into. She knew this not because anything had been taken, but only because several things such as picture frames had been moved around from their normal places. This led some to believe that someone else had paged Zebb from his aunt's home that night. Another strange occurrence we should note was a lone sighting of a woman seen driving Zebb's car sometime after his disappearance. Pictured on the screen is a police sketch of the woman in question. I couldn't find much information about this sighting, but allegedly, the sketch strongly resembled Misty Taylor. In 2009, police collected DNA samples and fingerprints from Misty, but it doesn't appear that anything came from this. Despite the several suspicious persons being involved with Zebb leading up to his disappearance, his case slowly went cold. On March 15, 2015, in Leicester, North Carolina, married couple Joseph and Christy Schoenkod were reported missing. Investigators found that the couple had recently hired a contractor named Robert Owens, and he quickly became the main suspect in their disappearance. He would later confess that he was responsible for the deaths of Joseph, Christy, and their unborn child, saying that he had accidentally hit them with his car and, in a panic, disposed of their remains. The murders of the Codd family brought Zebb's case back into the public eye, and in July of 2017, he was indicted for the first-degree murder of Zebb Quinn. While on trial this past year, Owens' defense told the following story of what happened the night of January 2, 2000. Owens' late uncle, named Walter Owens, had been hired by Misty Taylor's boyfriend to murder Zebb. Walter Owens then got his nephew to unknowingly lure Zebb to Pisgah National Forest, an over 500,000-acre expanse of wilderness in the mountains of North Carolina. Robert Owens said that his uncle had told them that Misty Taylor would be there, but when the two arrived, he shot Zebb and forced his nephew to help him dispose of his body in the national park. Robert Owens ended up being found guilty of accessory after the fact to the first-degree murder of Zebb Quinn. He was sentenced to 150 to 189 months to run concurrently with the 60 to 75-year sentence he was already serving for the murder of the Codd family. Thank you so much for watching. I'm planning on getting the rest of these parts out as quick as I can between normal uploads, so if you have any stories you would like me to cover in the near future, please let me know down in the comments below. I hope you have a blessed day, and as always, stay safe.